All right. All right. Your 6-year financial planner with Christine Skinner. Are
So
we going up,
we're going,
down, or
well, let's see.
can
Right.
hold
Can
on
you see
just
my screen now?
not yet. Let me do your introduction. I'll
Okay.
give it
All
over to
right.
you.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. Uh, Join us to determine what to do to feel financially safe for the next few years. This web and in-person workshop offers an Astro financial planner for the years spanning 2026 through 2032. Christine Skinner will also explore the trends for gold, silver, Bitcoin, and also consider the likelihood of a recession. So a little bit about Christine. Oh, I'm sorry, I misspelled your name on I
Don't worry.
put the
Don't worry.
wrong person on here. Sorry about that. Christine Skinner is a renowned financial astrologer, author, and director of Cityscopes London Limited. With decades of expertise in planetary cycles and global markets, she advises investors, traders, and businesses on celestial trends that shape the economy. A sought-after speaker and the author of several books on financial astrology, Christine blends ancient wisdom with modern finance, offering unique sights into the cosmic forces driving wealth and opportunity. So I just want y'all to know, this was the first book I ever got of Christine's, and it was enormously helpful. And I've got several others that she has. So if you have the opportunity and you have an interest in financial exploration, please take a moment to look up her books and obtain one. They are very easy to understand, very personably written, and will really take you through to a new understanding of how you can connect the dots in your astrological chart regarding them. All right, and now I'm going to turn it over to Christine. Thank you.
Well, thank you, but that was really a very grand opening. Thank you very much. Uh, Folks, I should say that when one is invited to do one of these things, you write down what you think you're going to do, and it's weeks ahead of when you're actually going to do it. And your intention is right at the time, but then things get in the way, and then the thing takes a life of its own, and it goes off in a different direction. So before we even start, can I just say I actually had to cut the slides that are peculiar to gold and silver. Now, I realize that's going to be disappointing to some people, but that does not mean that I'm not touching on gold and silver. I'm just not actually using the financial graphs for that. But you'll see why I've had to cut that when you see how much else we have to pour into this short time we have together. So I wanted to start off by first of all looking at the chart for now. Now we're this ascendant is slightly wrong because I thought that we would, by the time you'd had your meeting, that we'd probably be about 20 minutes after the hour, and it's not quite that yet. I think the sun is probably just setting here in London. But what I wanted you to see most of all, and to introduce you to, in case you haven't done it before, is the little thing that looks like a flame here. This is Vesta. Vesta, I consider to be the trader's asteroid. And as you can see yourself, Vesta is at 0 degrees of Capricorn. So therefore, Vesta, this trader's asteroid, is right on the world axis. And for those of you who may not have worked with that before, the world axis is 0, Aries, Cancer, Libra, and Capricorn. And obviously, it's a very important degree because, as you'll know, Saturn and Neptune are meeting up there very shortly. So I thought it was very interesting that we were going to have this financial conversation this weekend with Vesta placed in that position. It also gave me an excuse to introduce you to the asteroid. Now, here's the thing. We as astrologers are really focused on our solar system and the position of the planets in our birth charts. Assume we sort of see the solar system as standing on Earth and what was the distribution of the planets and a few asteroids around us. And it's all too easy to forget that actually the entire system is floating through space and moving through space at considerable miles per hour. So we go through the entire system as it spins through the Milky Way, goes through some quite dangerous patches. And we can't forecast those. And however good the chart is, and however excited you are about the fact that Jupiter's trine Saturn, it's always possible that there is something else going on that's actually much harsher and overrides that. So I absolutely want to start with the premise that we don't know everything, right? And I certainly don't know everything. And I'm learning all the time. And I'm as fascinated by heliocentric astrology as I am by geo, but I'm also looking even beyond that now. I've got heavily into black holes and all sorts of things, which I think is just, part of the rhythm of my life too. But I did want to make the point, I don't have all the answers. But I wanted to start off with the thing that we're all indebted to for life itself. And that's what's going on the sun. And the sun is most definitely not behaving normally. Now, we don't really know why that is. We can conjecture about why it is, but what I know, what we all know, is we absolutely need to know about the sun. The sun is the giver of life. If something happens with the sun, we're all doomed, right? We need it to do its job. But I don't know if you saw, but just 2 days ago, there was another fierce solar storm, and it was so fierce that it was not possible for a rocket to be launched. Now, you might say, well, that doesn't matter. My granddad was never worried about whether or not they launched a rocket or not. But we're living in a different age now. We have so many satellites orbiting round the Earth, and we've become dependent on them too for the GPS on your phones, distribution systems for food across the world, your mobile phone particularly. Right? So understanding what's going on the sun has become more important than it used to be. Now, you probably learnt when you were at school that there is a one definite solar rhythm. There are actually 5 inside the sun, but we're going to focus on one, which is what they call the sunspot cycle rhythm. And we are presently in number 25, which, given that the cycle is anything between 9 and 13 years long, you can see we've only got data for the last couple of 100 years. But even that is valuable. And I want you to see this. You have down the left-hand side of this page here, you've got numbers starting at 0 at the bottom, going all the way through to 380. And then you've got the decades since about 1840, 1850. And this is the sunspot cycle. And you can see yourself, there are no two the same, right? They're all different. But what is freaky is the one that's right over on the far right-hand side, which is the one that we're in at the moment, when we had a day in August of 2024, when there were more than 380 sunspots in one day. Now, if you take your eye back, yes, there were about 355, I think it was, during the cycle in the 1950s. But 380 is different. It's gone up again. It's gone up another 10% from that. So we're looking at solar behavior now that is very different to what we've had before. And however badly we are looking after the planet or not looking after the planet, we have to accept that the sun is not behaving as it's done before, and therefore there's a strong possibility that we're not behaving the same way either, because this is going to affect our hormone system, our immune system, the entire thing. So if I just have a look now at where we are and say we have a beginning to the cycle, which is known as solar minima, which happened about 2019 when there were very few sunspots. Now, if the average cycle is 11.2 years. So on that basis, you're expecting somewhere between year 5 and year 6 for the sunspot number to be high, for it to be sunspot maximum. Well, if I add, supposing we said actually it started in 2020, right, then we would be looking for a high somewhere 2025 or perhaps even into 2026. It is possible that this is going to be a very short cycle and that we had the high in 2024. A lot of people were expecting the high to have been in July 2025. But that freak that we had in August of 2024 rather suggests we're dealing with something a little different. Now, this is relevant financially because what we know is that when the sunspot numbers are small and minimal, right, back in 2019, 2020, stock market returns and things tend to be low as well. We know too that at solar maximum, that's when the indices tend to go very high. So, I don't know if we've had the high yet, but supposing this is going to be a short cycle, supposing it is, supposing it's going to be one of the 9-year or 10-year cycles, then we would be coming to a low in 2030-ish. Now, we can't forecast that. We just simply have to keep an eye on this. And if you're interested in this at all, and I suggest you become interested, you can get an app from spaceweather.com, put it on your phone. It doesn't cost you anything, and it will tell you what the sunspot activity is on any day. And it's quite interesting watching the fluctuation. A sunspot is very different to a solar flare. Right? You'll learn more by going to space weather. But just seeing the rhythms and the outbursts from the sun, that's quite interesting. The NASDAQ, which we're not going to look at particularly here, has a tendency to fall about 2% after a solar flare, right? Which is very interesting, right? Particularly when you consider what this NASDAQ is made up of, right? And then it recovers, of course, but there are rhythms within rhythms within rhythms. So the bit that right, is that astrologers anticipated a global financial crisis in 2007, 2008. And several of us were on record for saying, this doesn't look very good to us. Pluto entering Capricorn at the same time that Saturn was going to oppose Uranus and a few other things, all made it look pretty miserable time. Well, when my book came out, when I'd done this, which was 2004, the first financial universe book that I did, the book bombed because people said, no, that can't, but that won't happen, Christine. That's ridiculous. Banks won't have a crisis. But astrologers were aware of that. Pluto entering Capricorn, we were going to have a crisis. And one of the things where you have an advantage over other people with financial matters is where Pluto is. You know where the other planets are. And you also know that when the planets move from one sector or one zodiac sign to another, there tends to be a financial ripple, right? The accent changes. Things move from one thing to another. We're going to explore the idea a bit later, hopefully all of us together, because you can see with Jupiter, when Jupiter's changing sign every year, as it goes to each zodiac sign, the sectors associated with that sign tend to flourish, right? And other ones drop off, being the popular ones. And we'll do that a little bit later. So we knew that Pluto was going to go through Capricorn, right? And we suspected that there would be a banking crisis. I think most of us thought that by the time Pluto left Capricorn, the banking system would be unrecognizable. We expected that there would be some accountability for the original crisis. That, of course, hasn't happened in quite the way that we thought, right? But what we have learned is this, and I've taken the next few slides come from headlines that I've got from things like Bloomberg. So central banks can still steer the ship, but the global tides now are stronger than they were. And this is the bit that we've really got to focus on. Again, I had to cut this out of the presentation, but we know, for example, that whenever Neptune and Pluto align, which they do about every 500 years, you get a switch then from investments that tend towards the west and investments that tend towards the east. And we're now in that period now where things are moving more towards the east and arguably more towards the southern hemisphere as well. So we're seeing that these global tides are much stronger than what we thought were fairly established Western tides, like the Dow Jones, like, the FTSE in London. We thought that they were, virtually they could stand on their own 2 feet, didn't matter what was going on elsewhere. The financial shock waves don't just flow from America anymore. They used to do, right? But as and I've just taken this straight from wherever the newspaper was. So the data on cross-border holdings shows that between 2015 and 2023, now think about that for a minute, those years, right? Because Pluto went through Capricorn, we know, but we also know that you can divide any sign up into three segments. You have three decans, right? And there was a definite shift. There was the original Pluto Saturn Capricorn decan, right? And then Pluto was moving into the second decan, which it did about 2014. Right? So, and they're saying between 2015, which allow a little bit of a margin, they're right, that there was a single increase in holdings of US bonds came from European investors. So this was a very, very different shift, right? And that means that the two-way flow, not just between the USA and Europe, but actually right across the world, is so very different. So what you are experiencing with your money, right, is absolutely different to what your parents would have done or your grandparents or great-grandparents. I think we now have to cope with, and again, I've lifted this, it's a new map for a new world. And it's so interesting that they're saying the map of global finance has been fundamentally redrawn since 2008. Well, isn't that Pluto in Capricorn? But this next sentence is beautiful. The quiet plumbing of the system has been rerouted. Well, the quiet plumbing, that's, plumbing is a Pluto word. Rerouted is an Aquarius word. So we are seeing that there is the emphasis on where you're going to invest and how you're going to use money. All of that has changed irrevocably. We also know that the world isn't funded by bank loans anymore, right? The stability of the system is depending on other factors, right? And the world is now funded by government bonds and pension funds. So we have to be more interested, really, in who the big players are. Right? It didn't used to matter who the big players were, but now we need to know who's in those jobs and what they think of a system. So here we are. Before I get on to you as such, Pluto in Aquarius, right? It entered 2024, sort of decided it didn't like it, backed up a bit into Capricorn for a bit, if you remember, but it doesn't leave properly until into the 2040s. And they're saying that the next crisis might not start in a bank's loan book, but in a complex hedging portfolio of a pension fund on the other side of the world. Well, doesn't that just scream Pluto in Aquarius? A bank's loan book. Aquarius, for us, is the 11th house of any chart. It's a distribution center, right? It's where you bring people together, but they lend and hopefully cooperate with one another. But supposing somebody decides not to cooperate, then the system collapses. And this final thing, I think this is the final one of these slides. There's 111 trillion, you can't even get your head around that. Hidden market is the new linchpin of global finance, right? And everything now is happening within what is known as forex trading or foreign exchange trading. Right? So now we're moving into having to deal with currencies and financial ideas that were absolutely unknown, say back in 2000. Right? We've just entered a period of extraordinary transition. Right? So in trying to guide you through what I believe this next 6 years of this new thinking that we're going to have, I can't have all the answers, but I can flag up for you where you need to do your research and where you can't be one step ahead of these people, but where you could perhaps be in tandem. So here we are. Pluto is now on the edge and just entered into Aquarius. And we should stop and give that some thought. I don't know how you operate your personal finances, but most of us think, well, there'll be at some point in the future, I want to have a savings fund. Right? And Pluto is really, really good for long-term investments. Right? Pluto's the one that it starts small and hopefully things are going to grow. So we should be thinking as astrologers, which seeds do we think being planted now have the potential to become the businesses of the future? And we consider then, how do we invest in Pluto? Well, Pluto has to start small. It has to start as a little plant under the ground, right? And then you have to look after it. You have to water it and keep your eye on it. But everybody, I think, should do a little bit of Pluto investing. Now, I'm sure you're going to have lots of ideas about this, and hopefully I'm going to not talk so much that you don't get a chance to have a play with some of the ideas. But it's not fantasy to think that we've been driving in cars and we've now got driverless cars, I know, right? But Aquarius is an air sign. Is it possible that soon we're going to have flying motorbikes, right? I think they're already there in Japan. Could we also consider that Pluto, which has a reputation for dirtiness, dirt, underground, mucky, right? Aquarius air, are we going to be very much more focused on air pollution? And there will be industries that develop through that. There's also the whole thing about, can we get into space? Because Aquarius, the Aquarian thing will be, can we go, where else can we get to? Shall we invest in going to Mars? Is Elon Musk right? And you don't have to necessarily invest in his companies, but you might want to start to think about investing in the people who make the screws or the nuts and bolts and things that build those rockets, because there's clearly going to be a market for that. So the Aquarius decans, the first 5 years of this, and notice how there's not an even amount of time here. The first decan is ruled by Uranus, and Uranus does things differently. So the companies that are likely to do particularly well over these next 5 years are going to be the ones that think totally out of the box, and which you think are completely, they've lost the plot, that those ideas won't work. But actually they're planting seeds which we may not see flourish until 2043. In 2029, there's a major planetary gear shift. The second decan is ruled by Mercury. So that's going to bring in a whole communications network in a different way to the ones we've experienced so far. And the third decan, which we're not talking about today, is ruled by Venus. And presumably by that time, there'll be a sense of urgency about companies coming together and forming alliances. The Uranus end of it is, we're doing this ourselves. We don't want any of your money. We're going to be we're going to be entrepreneurs. By the end of this time, you can see that companies are likely to come together. So here, this is where we are. I want us to look at 2026 through to 2032. Those are not arbitrary numbers. I've chosen that time frame because I think that these next 6 years, we're all of us going to have to be super careful when it comes to financial matters. Before I show you why I think this, I want to take you back to the 2nd of November of 2020. This is when heliocentrically Jupiter and Saturn aligned, if you remember, at 1 degree of Aquarius. So this was the first, I don't know how many of you are baby astrologers, but if you're not familiar with this, Jupiter and Saturn only form a conjunction about every 20 years, and they have a rhythm to them. So for about 240 years, each of those conjunctions will be in one element of the zodiac. And after about 240 years, they move on to the next element. So we have just come out of, throughout the 19th and the 20th century, each of the conjunctions was in an earth sign. And you'll know that whilst things were in an earth sign, the full value was on things like gold. People thought you needed to have something tangible. It was an earth sign. So gold had special value for your parents and your grandparents, and you will have inherited some of that thinking that it's a good idea to have those assets. But we are now moving to a different age, and with the emphasis now on air signs of the zodiac, it's not surprising really that there's this hunger and real interest in things that are more intellectual, if you like, right? That you can't hold. It's an idea. And there's no question that the new cryptocurrencies are very much an idea. They're not tangible. Now, there's no way that I'm going to say to anybody, ditch your gold and go towards the cryptos, because we are in a transition period. But I think it would be unwise not to have a foot in both camps. I know a lot of people say the crypto stuff is all smokes and mirrors. It's going to crash. It's not backed by anything. It's a waste of time. I'm sticking with gold, right? Well, actually, even your gold could lose value should, let's suppose, some meteorite comes to Earth and it's solid gold, right? And instead of gold being scarce, it's suddenly plentiful. We can all have a slice of it. Then the value of it is going to drop. The other thing is that the value of gold is set in the main against the US dollar. But if the dollar starts to fall, then the value of gold is falling as well. So again, we're not exploring much of that today, but I just wanted you to see that we need to have a foot really in both camps. But for a moment, I want you to humor me, because we're going to have a little journey. We need to know, what else do we know about 1 degree of Aquarius? Is there anything about 1 degree of Aquarius that's particularly special? Well, there is, because back in 1344, there was a Saturn-Neptune conjunction at 1 Aquarius. And as you know, Saturn and Neptune are going to meet together at 0 degrees Aries next year. So it's kind of, it's bringing these two themes together. Now, a cathedral was built then, the St. Vitus Cathedral in Prague. It wasn't the only cathedral that was put up in the 14th century, and nor did it go up overnight. But I want to think about this because each one of you is about to start to build a cathedral, not a literal one, but you will all going to be having ideas. And I want to show you how to play with these in a financial sense. Think about that cathedral for a minute. Somebody had the idea. As I said, it didn't go up overnight, right? So somebody had the idea. Then they had to get the land. They had to prepare the land. They had to make a blueprint, right? Design the thing, right? Then try and find the right cash in order to build the thing. Again, that's a long haul. So maybe they couldn't find all the cash, and maybe they had to moderate what they wanted to do. Or maybe there was some king or what emperor or whatever who said, actually, it's not grand enough. I want a bit more. In other words, the idea had to be played with for quite some time before we finally get to this thing, which must have taken more than one Saturn-Neptune cycle to appear. But the point is that this was an extraordinary idea. It was consolidating a dream. Saturn is good for consolidation. Saturn is not always a bad planet. Neptune is about a dream and a vision. And when you put the two things together, you can form beautiful crystals and you can make absolutely gorgeous patterns. Which brings us to where we are now. And this is what we're all of us sitting under. Now, forgive me, this little bit of slide actually was created 2 months ago. And you will know, most of you, that Uranus has now returned to Taurus for a few months, right? But essentially, this picture is still there. This little triangle is hanging around, and we're all living underneath this triangle. So we know that Pluto has gone into Aquarius. We know too that Uranus had entered into Gemini, and there was 120 degrees, a trine aspect between them. Now that's a very lovely thing. That cycle began in the middle of the 1960s when Uranus and Pluto aligned in Virgo. They went through their square, if you remember, whilst we had the Arab Spring and things, 2011, 2012-ish. And now they've come to their trine. And it's absolutely in keeping and right that people are saying this is the advent of artificial intelligence. That's one way of looking at it. But I want you to notice something else. Uranus is not on its own. It's next door to this one. And if you haven't met this before, this is Sedna. Um, I'm enjoying a new relationship with Sedna at the moment. Believe me, actually, I've never been too thrilled when they come up with another planet or another asteroid or something. There's enough in the chart already. But we need to know about Sedna because it takes Sedna just over 11,407 years, I think it is, years to go right round the zodiac. So the last time that Uranus and Sedna conjoined in Gemini was about 11,500 years ago. We've got no experience of that. Your mum and dad haven't gone through it. Grandparents, great grandparents, doesn't matter how far you go back in your ancestry, you aren't going to get there. So we are living under extraordinary new conditions. And however good you are at reading any chart at the moment, I think we also have to accept that we don't know much about this bit. Now, what's fascinating is that presently both Saturn and Neptune are halfway on the midpoint, if you like, of that trine between Uranus, Sedna, and Pluto. So we're all of us living under this little triangle. Now, what does it mean? It means that if we take the Saturn thing out of it, Neptune is on the midpoint of Uranus and Pluto. Let's just take the bits that we understand. Neptune, a planet that's often associated with oil, right? Pluto is often associated with energy, Uranus with new forms of energy. It could be that this is part of a story of the world moving from oil, which has been, oil has driven politics and greed and money for, since the middle of the 19th century. It could be that this Neptune, as acting as a referee on this point, is leading us towards a different kind of financial structure in the world. Who knows? Right? Saturn is also on that point. Saturn doesn't want to do things, right? Saturn has like to have the control. The cosmic headmaster isn't going to give up his teaching rod very quickly, but Saturn's going to move off that. So we're in a period of some short restraint, only for a few months now. But then early next year, sort of from April of next year, when Uranus is firmly into Gemini and trining the Pluto, then I think we really do enter into a different age. Now, in financial terms, the Gemini end of this is all about how we trade. So I am looking for new trading conditions. And the flags are up for that already with the slide that I showed you early, which is because this is all about foreign exchange. It's about how money is going to be different. And none of us can afford to not to ignore the fact that the whole system of money is changing. I don't know how it is for you in Dallas, but I imagine it's much the same as I've just come back from Toronto, and certainly here in London. I didn't have any need for cash in Toronto. Everywhere I went, I could use my phone or a card to pay for things. Cash has become redundant. So I think we also have to accept that the shape of money is going to be different. But with that, there comes opportunity because somebody has to look after all of that stuff, right? They have to try and prevent hacking. They have to do some security. So there will be new forms, new sectors, new industries that thrive. Saturn and Neptune are going to meet on the world axis, and I'm absolutely certain that there will be many, many talks in the next few months with people who've done some exquisite research, and it will be exquisite research that shows how Saturn and Neptune has worked with disease cycles in the past. You can see a resonance with that. Also, I mean, the big one will be to do with Russia and the old USSR, because it seems that whenever Saturn and Neptune are conjoined or in hard aspect with one another, there's an alteration in the political thing for that geographical area. So we should anticipate that's going to be a factor probably in 2026, and that will have reverberations obviously on the the war between Russia and Ukraine. And that has implications, financial implications too, because Ukraine is the breadbasket of the world. That's where most of the wheat that serves Africa comes from. If that problem is not solved, if we don't come to the end of this war, we have more starving people. If we have starving people, they start to move to areas of the world where they think they can live better or feed their families better. So we have refugee crises. Everything is linked to everything else. I think we have to consider that we're in the process of being rewired. And truly, I don't think any of us know what's coming next. Nor do I think we know what's really happening within our brains and how we're being asked to think differently. I don't know if you've experienced this at the moment, but I think it's quite useful to keep some kind of dream journal or whatever and see what ideas are coming to you. You can't fast forward on any of this. And I'm sure you've had that experience, as I've had far too often, where Microsoft takes over my machine and says it's going to upgrade me. I don't want to be upgraded. I certainly don't want to be upgraded at that moment. But I can only reject it so many times before it says, no, I'm upgrading you now. And apparently Apple does the same kind of thing. I think we're going to have to be patient and accept that this rewiring of our brains and rewiring of our commercial thinking will not be concluded until 2032. And I'll show you why in a moment. I'm afraid we just have to be patient. So we're back into this, and we're back into this rhythm, right? These incredible waves that are going on. But it just so happens that many of these waves are now in sync. And that suggests to me, and when I say waves in sync, I mean that there are so many cycles. As we know, 2025, we had, we got so many planets changing signs. It's when one outer planet changes signs, that's a big thing. When several of them do it together, right? It's really, it feels like it's to hell in a handcart. There's significant turbulence. So here we're going to start our planning. Now I'm going to show you quite a few of these, and in case you're not used to them, let me take your eye through these, because this is, I will send this PDF out to you. I'll show you how to get hold of this anyway. Print it out and put it on your fridge. It's going to be really, really useful for you. So across the top of the page, we've just left the third quarter of 2025. There's the fourth quarter. Then you've got the years all the way through to the end of 2032. Now down the side here, you've got 0 to 360 degrees of the zodiac. So 0 to 30 would cover Aries, 30 to 60 is covering Gemini, and you can do, the order of them all. And all I've got here is I've got the slow moving planets. That's all I've got. Where you see the dot, where a dot appears, the dot means that that planet is moving sign. And those dots are really, they're critical for us. So if we have a look right up at the top here in the first quarter of 2026, there you've got the meeting of Saturn and Neptune conjoined at 0 degrees of Aries. You know that. And you can see over the course of the 6 years we're interested in, Neptune doesn't actually do very much. The wave, by the way, when the curve starts to go up towards the top of the page, that means the planet has gone retrograde. When it's turned down towards the bottom of the page, it's in direct motion. So Saturn, of course, which moves so much faster, there you go. There is Saturn is moving through Aries between the first quarter of 2026. But in 2028, which is vitally important for us, right, it moves into Taurus, one of the financial zones. And then it will move in the second quarter of 2029. It goes off into Gemini before it meets up over here. It's going to meet up with Uranus, which will have been traveling all that time through Gemini. Jupiter, of course, is moving really fast. I left it in there just so that you could see it's changing sign once every year. Right? But it's this that matters. Here's Pluto moving now through Aquarius. So it's between 300 degrees and 330, and it doesn't really do very much. But the squiggly line here is the lunar node. And And it, as you know, the lunar node always works backwards through the zodiac. And you'd be interested in this. So the lunar node is going to be conjoined with Pluto. Where's that? This is just the tail end of 2027, coming into 2028, right? We're not interested in the exact date. We just need to get an idea of this. And the next thing we want to know is, when has it done that before? Because that's how astrologers work, right? What happened when it did it before? Well, here we go. Again, I've used the same thing. I'm going back now to 1785. In 1770, Pluto was in Capricorn, and there it was. It crossed over into Aquarius, did it several times. Well, what? And there was the lunar node. And there's the crossing, right? There's the node crossing over Pluto, and you can see it was over the best part of a month or so it was crossing. So what you want to know is, okay, that's very interesting, Christine. So exactly what happened? Well, that was the establishment of the dollar, the US dollar, which was then at that point based on the widely used Spanish silver dollar. And the founding fathers adopted, as we know, this base 10 monetary system. Right? So we now know in the past that's brought a new currency. Right? And we know, of course, how important the US dollar has been, particularly during the 20th century. It has its own chart. The actual official date for the US dollar, in case you don't know this one, is the 2nd of April, 1792. I don't have an exact time for it, so ignore the houses on this one. But I did think that it was worth pointing out just a few things about it. Mercury was at 19 degrees of Aries. When I did my research for exploring the financial universe, one of the other books, I found that 19 degrees of the cardinals showed up regularly whenever there was a financial event of some kind. Now, obviously, Mercury goes past 19 Aries of every year, and we don't have a crash or anything every year. It's just significant that there is something about 19 degrees of the cardinals that makes it a very powerful financial degree. The dollar, I'm sure nobody was working on this at the time because they didn't even know Neptune was there then, right? It came into being with a Jupiter-Neptune conjunction, virtually exact, both of them at 28 degrees of Libra rather. Right? So it came in with the wonderful dream, right? It was, the currency for everyone. On the left-hand side there, I've also put the declination positions, which I believe to be absolutely super important. And here you've got Mars in exact parallel with Saturn, which gives the US dollar real strength, gutsy strength. We've also got Jupiter and Neptune aren't just conjoined, they're also in parallel with one another. So that again reinforces the vision of it. But please look too at this Pluto, which is at 23 degrees south. It's an out of bounds Pluto. I heard this lovely expression recently. We were talking about out of bound planets, and somebody described this planet as being feral. And I just think that is out of bounds. That's exactly as it is. It's feral, right? You can't train the blasted thing, right? And there it is. This US dollar is very definitely feral and has been. So now another chart, which I think you will want to have on your fridge. And I'm really embarrassed about this because I genuinely intended to look this up before I came online. And perhaps one of you could do it whilst I'm talking and put it in the chat. There's a book called Horoscopes for the New Millennium. And if somebody could get me the, oh God, it's gone from me again because I am crediting the wrong person with this chart. And it's the guy who wrote that book who should get the credit. If you don't have the book, you should get it. It was written in the 1990s, and the forecast that it has for the USA, even for this year, is mind-blowing. How could he have done that? Brilliant, brilliant book. Anyway, he should be credited with this chart. And what it is I learned about it through Claude Weiss, who's an incredible Swiss mundane astrologer, fabulous. And what it is, it's the chart for the solar eclipse that preceded the most recent Neptune-Pluto conjunction. That's quite a mouthful, isn't it? But it's a brilliant chart. It has that solar eclipse was at 7 degrees of Taurus. And I'll leave you to have fun with this. But if you want to do any of the major historical events of the 20th century, you'll find that 7 degrees of the fixed very, very often show up. Very often. Now, this is describing what he's saying is that this is covering about 500 years. It's a very interesting chart because you've got Uranus on one side and the sun and moon on the other. And look at the Uranus position, 3 degrees of Scorpio. And we know that Pluto is headed to be at 3 degrees of Aquarius. This chart was showing us really how for the whole of mankind, that the 20th century particularly was going to be highly political in a way that other centuries had not been. And we've had it's also brought in all the new technologies, the revolutions that have come with that. As Pluto squares the Uranus position and comes in to square the sun moon, right? We have to think, is it possible that mankind is going to be unkind to itself, right? Are we going to have another war? And sadly, I think that's going to be the case. I think we're headed towards one. Sorry, I'm just going to look in the chat. Somebody has been kind enough. Yeah, Meese. How could I forget that? Meese. Eric Allen Meese. Look, I know that the book is also available as an ebook. It's a big. If you have it, if you buy the real copy of it, it's a doorstopper. But it's absolutely wonderful to have. I wouldn't wish to part with it. Right. So I'm saying I wouldn't wish to part with it, but the reason I can't find it is I've lent it to someone, which is typical. So I wanted to point out that in this chart of mankind, and incidentally, Venus is feral, right, out of bounds, might explain why we haven't managed to get along with one another as well as we should be doing. But the Mars is at 24 degrees of Capricorn. There will be a solar eclipse more or less exactly at that degree in January of 2029. And that's the first date that I want to give you. And you definitely want to know about that. What you perhaps don't want to know about is the fact that I've got, excuse me 1 second, I just need to let the cat in. It's pouring with rain here, and the cat went out at the wrong time. Anyway, here we go. So there is going to be an eclipse on the 14th of January of 2029, which will be on the Mars degree from the Meese chart. And that puts me a little bit on red alert and makes me think this is not, that's not looking very good. So, but we know eclipses come round in cycles. So roughly speaking, about, 18, 19 years. So we should look back to see, well, what happened last time, right? Was there anything significant about that? Look at the nodal position of this, because this we're going to want this as well. The south node is at 14 degrees of Cancer, which is virtually on the USA's solar position. So if I look back, if I go back 19 years from 2029, I'm back to an eclipse which took place exactly on that degree, sun, moon with Venus, right? Look at that, amazing, on the 15th of January 2010. And what happened then? The US stocks finished January 2010 in the red. Now, this was just post the global financial crash, but things had been, that a recovery had been sort of in process. I'm now looking at this and thinking, I think we need to be aware that 2029, for those of you who are already in the stock market, there may well be a significant dip in 2029. So now we have to come to where we are now. We're at, where are we? We're jumping between 2025 and 2026. And what we know is that Neptune is crossing the world axis. Now, it's done it before, right? And the world axis, as I said, is 0 degrees of each of the cardinal signs. If I go back to the 19th century, there was a financial panic in the USA. In the early part of the 20th century, there was a US economic crisis. In 1942, a different kind of crisis, World War II. In 1984, it was the Israeli bank stock crisis, which reverberated across the world. And now we've got Neptune on the world axis again. We've got the threat of tariffs, right? But it may not be tariffs that actually create the panic. Tariffs may just be a smokescreen, right? Which would be apt for Neptune as well. So I think we have to be prepared now as we cross over this world axis with Saturn, albeit, right? For the potential for there being a financial drama. You will be familiar with this chart, which is for the Saturn-Neptune conjunction at 0 degrees of Aries in February of next year, the 20th of February. It doesn't happen alone, though. You always need to go in underneath and see what else is happening. And the same day, we have Jupiter and Pluto in opposition, or sorry, in contra-parallel with one another, which you can think of as being like an opposition. Also, you've got Venus with the North Node. So I think that this is, I think February is going to find us witnessing some kind of financial drama. You don't always have to know what the drama is. If you know something is coming, if you know it's going to be a stormy day, you get your umbrella out. So we have to be prepared and say, well, actually, I think this could be a slippy one, right? What can I do to protect my position before this happens? Although we're talking about this happening in February, right? If I look at it from the heliocentric point of view, it actually happens on the 11th of December, right, of this year. Right? And this is where I'm going to go bring back our cathedral and what you might do to secure your own financial position. This is the heliocentric, remember, it's as though you were standing on the sun. There's Uranus and Pluto trying to one another. There's Saturn and Neptune halfway between the two. And as it happens, and it depends how much orb you want to give it, right? Mercury, which darts around the sun every 88 days, will make that into a kite. Now that kite, right, whether or not you do geocentrically or heliocentrically, has been with us now for the last few months, and is going to be with us now for quite a time. In fact, every month, the moon is going to oppose, the moon's going to cross 0 degrees Libra and make the little triangle into a kite. Now, sometimes you'll be asleep and you'll miss that, but other times you're going to be awake. I'm going to suggest that, you know, as part of your little research group, you think of the ideas you have during that time, because it's only for a few hours, whilst, you know, it depends how much orb you want to find. But this is where the thinking of the cosmos as giving you a download and new ideas. This is where these ideas might come. And you will be trying to do some long-term cathedral plan. So we should look now, though, for the Saturn-Neptune, look back to see when was the last time that pair were on the world axis. And the last time they were, it was the 2nd of July, 1738. And it was a pretty miserable time. The Russian army began to attempt to cross the Dniester River, and it failed after 3 weeks because it was later decimated by plague. Now, Saturn and Neptune, and I said other people are going to be doing talks on this, and they will be talking about that being the disease cycle. And I cannot rule out the possibility of some vicious flu in the early part of next year. I've always thought that COVID-19 was potentially, it was the overture, right, a hint, right, of a bigger pandemic that could come in 2026. Obviously, I want to be wrong, right? But, you know, we are still slightly ahead of the curve now. I had a conversation yesterday with a pharmacist because I was asking about the vaccinations, the flu vaccinations, and he was telling me that they decide the strains about in the February of the year, right? But actually, the new strain that has come in of the viral flu type attack actually developed in June, and the vaccines they've got won't actually cover that one. He's still saying have the vaccine as they do because at least it'll take the edge off things. But I am genuinely concerned about the potential for kind of as they had at the end of the First World War. The First World War virtually ended because of Spanish flu, right? And not because people wanted to put down arms. So I'm giving you a heads up on that. So if you're going to invest in anything in the next few weeks, invest in your health. Now, before we come to you and your world, let's just consider what we might have to cope with in the next few years. And a recession, I think, is absolutely likely. You may or may not have seen this chart that's on the left-hand side. This is the McWhirter North Node business cycle. And this was prepared back in, I think, the late 1940s. It was prepared in the USA. And this is, I think, the caveat that I would put with this. I know we've got a guest here from Turkey, and I would say, and I'm here from the UK, obviously, the recessions work slightly differently in different countries, but and so they can spread over about an 18-month period, and different countries will experience it more intensely at some periods than others. But this is really clever, this dial here. This is the lunar node and the signs there. And this is saying something about stocks. And prices apparently tend to go up, right, as the lunar node is going up and towards Leo. But as you know, the lunar node works backward through the zodiac. So after Leo, it comes all the way, and prices tend to be down when the lunar node goes into Aquarius, which it's going to do in 2026. So that's one thing to look at. I did a little bit more work on this, and I decided that it wasn't just down to the lunar node, because every recession has a different signature. It's caused, the history books will show it was always created, the reasoning behind it would be different for each one. So doing that, right, the column on the left-hand side here, can you see the numbers here are more or less all they're 18 years apart. This is the position by sign of the lunar node. And there's a pattern here, isn't there? So you would expect this one here, 2028, lunar node should be in Aquarius. And isn't it interesting that the lunar node, although it works backwards through the zodiac, in this list here, the signs are moving in the forward direction. So that's quite interesting. Over here on the right-hand side is the position of Jupiter by sign. And unsurprisingly, Jupiter, because it crosses from one sign to another in any year, you get two, right? But you can still see a pattern between them. So in 1902, it was moving from Capricorn into Aquarius. In 1920, right, the shift moved the opposition of Aquarius as Leo. There was a little bit of Virgo in there too. 1938, the opposite of Leo, Aquarius, then the opposite of Aquarius, Leo, Aquarius. And we can actually start to do this little pattern. Now, if you, I'm going to leave you to, because the reason I put the question marks there is you do some work on this. See what you think the next thing should be. I think it's going to be for 2028. I think the lunar node's going to be in Aquarius and Jupiter is going to be in Virgo. That fits. Right? So I am looking for a major recession, global recession in 2028. That's my thinking. But I have colleagues who are saying, no, you're wrong, Christine, it's going to be 2027. And then I listened to somebody else's lecture last night who said, actually, I think it's going to start in 2026. And there's a good argument for saying it will start in 2026 because the lunar node will be moving into Aquarius. So I think we're on pattern-wise, we're on, the timing-wise, this is where we are. Let me have a glass of water. Have we got any questions so far whilst I glug? I'm going to say thank you to Maureen again for finding the book. Okay, I'll keep going then. So now we got to think about blockchain. Um, I said right at the start that I wanted to cover the 6 years, 2026 to 2032. The reason I chose 2032 is because that's the next Saturn-Uranus conjunction. But I wanted you to see the entire cycle. They've met up on the 13th of February, 1988. They actually met up 3 times that year, but let me take the first one. Saturn-Uranus met up at 29 degrees of Sagittarius, almost exactly on the world axis at 0 Capricorn, which should have been the alert thing for us saying there's going to be a significant move, right? A significant financial change, right? So it all began in 1988. Their next conjunction opposes that, but again, very, very close to the world axis. And between those two things, unbelievably and exquisitely, when Saturn and Uranus opposed one another, that's when the Halloween paper came out, the white paper that predated Bitcoin. So I'm looking at Saturn as being a block, right? Uranus as being a chain, right? I think this is to do with all the blockchain currencies, and it's not just currencies, it's whole artificial intelligence. So this will be the chart in 2032. This is what we're aiming for, right? And what I want to try and do is help you prepare your financial plan so that by the time we get to 2032, you know where you're at. You've got, it's very hard to have control over anything. And I mean, life is about facing challenges, but to be knowledgeable, to be informed. And 2032 is a really important time, not just because of the Saturn-Uranus, the completion of that one cycle, but because the nodal axis will be 7 degrees of the fixed, picking up on the the chart of mankind thing. This is a real break moment. Significantly, though, Saturn and Neptune will be 72 degrees apart. 72 degrees is exactly 1/5 of a circle. And that's an important part, that's an important phase, right? A fifth, just think about that. Very often you get people actually when they get to age 72 and people think they're retired and they've stopped and whatever. Quite often they have some incredibly good ideas then, and they envisage them. And how often do you read these remarkable stories of people who've done something amazing in this last bit of their life? So this chart here, I think, is crucial. Right? Look at where Pluto is. Right? Pluto's at 14 degrees of Aquarius, so it will be almost halfway through its journey. So by then, some of the Aquarian ideas should be super well established. So I'm hopeful, I am actually hopeful, right, that investments made now that are towards the Aquarian age could actually pay some dividends, right? And I'm saying dividends as opposed to essential profits. But let's go back to 1988 and 89, right? You may remember that this is when the Berlin Wall came down. And so this was the end of and if you like, we had an economic earthquake from the east arrived. The fall of the Berlin Wall actually happened with Saturn and Neptune together, 10 degrees of Capricorn. And Jupiter and Chiron were opposing that. It was an extraordinary time, though. And Uranus wasn't so far away. It was a very, very definite gear change. Now, there are many, many walls in the world. The famous one, of course, is the Great Wall of China, which I don't think is going to fall down. But I do wonder whether or not we might see, we've had the Berlin Wall has gone. There's been a major wall in Baghdad. There's Mr. Trump's big, beautiful wall, right? The longest fence in the world is between India and Bangladesh. Then there's the Moroccan wall, 1,700 miles of it. Who knew, right? There's the wall, the UK and Ireland have had its difficulties, and there's the West Bank. Any one of these, I think, could be like 1988, and we see a wall collapse, which brings with it an economic tide. And I think we have to be positioned ready for that. China, I think, is in the frame here. As I said, I don't think the Great Wall of China is going to fall down, but I do think its attitude to change to commerce is going to be vastly different. Now, it's got a very difficult year ahead. Its birthday is the 1st of October, 1949, its most recent one. And whatever time of day you want to choose for that, it's got a stellium in Libra. And you and I know Saturn is on its way into Aries, right? So it's going to have Saturn opposing each one of those Libra planets all the way through 2026 and into 2027. And that looks a bit flipping ugly. It also came into being with the moon in contraparallel with Uranus. So the people are, they're kind of edgy, politically antsy, right? We never really know what the Chinese people want. What we do know is that it's a huge, huge area of the world with many very, very different tribes, if you like, involved. And harmony must be very difficult to achieve. I'm wondering because much of the crypto stuff and the blockchain stuff has been coming out of China. And it's significant, isn't it, that the Saturn-Uranus conjunction of 1988 was exact on Vesta. Right? So it's almost been the birthplace, right, or certainly a place where Bitcoin and other currencies have gathered considerable momentum. Right? If I were to do a horary chart for the 8th of June, right, of 2033, right, look at, and again, I'm looking for problems, but that's actually what my job, a lot of the time, my job is to look to see where are there going to be lows, Christine, because if you can show me where the lows are, that's when I want to buy in. Right? And I thought I would introduce you to this chart, which is extraordinary. It's just out of our range because it's now a year after 2032. But look, we have the moon and node at 19 of the cardinals and Neptune on the other end. That Wednesday, 8th of June, 2033, that looks to me like that's a financial banana skin there. But it could also be a really good buying opportunity. So we now come to you. It's taken me an hour to do that. So let's now come to you. These are the solar eclipses and their degrees over this next 6 years. If you've got a planet at any one of these degrees, and I'm going to suggest that you allow yourself an orb. I'm quite tight. I'm a bit miserable on all of this. I don't really like to go more than 2.5 degrees. But your experience might be different to mine. Maybe you'll go up to 4, but I wouldn't go more than that. But if you've got a planet on any one of these degrees, remember, a solar eclipse is a sophisticated new moon. Right? And whereas a normal new moon carries energy for a few weeks, right? An eclipse can carry energy for considerably longer. Some people say that the number of minutes of an eclipse translates to the number of years, right? So if it's a 3-minute eclipse, it's going to last for 3 years. I don't know about that, right? But I do know that, some degrees of the zodiac carry more weight than others. So this is a fairly long list here, but I thought you would be interested in it. I also wanted you to see the pattern of it. Now, forgive me, I know this looks messy, so I've tried to make it as easy to read as possible. Once again, down the left-hand side, you've got 360 degrees. Across the top, 2026 through to 2032. You've got the slow-moving planets that I showed you before. Now it's going to get a little bit different. Do you see that there are some circles with an F? Those are full moons. And this one here, we would be interested in this. This is a full moon in, where's that? About the 3rd quarter of 2026. And that full moon aligns with Pluto. So that makes it a bit, it's got more importance than normal. And you can do this yourself. These ones here, the yellow ones, these are lunar eclipses. And this one here would be of interest to us. This lunar eclipse, right, which is a pretty exact one here. This is, where's this one? this is in 2029. That looks like quite a key one. Sometimes you'll find, look here, there's a full moon here on the fourth quarter of 2028 that's very close to both Saturn and Chiron. And we absolutely need to talk about that. And the red ones, these are the solar eclipses. And, you know, there's a pattern here. You could weave some nice material out of this, couldn't you? A bit of a funky pattern. This one's a bit of a corker here. This is a full moon that's with Uranus, fourth quarter of 2026. Right? That looks could be some unexpected fireworks. And there's another one there in the fourth quarter of 2028. And then there's a lunar eclipse that's not too far from Uranus, the fourth quarter of 2030. You can print these ones out as well, right? Because if you've got, I mean, it's just a means of doing a kind of calendar for yourself, for seeing which full moons are likely to bring either global events or maybe pick up on your own chart. So in our financial planning, right, we absolutely must look at this point here. Now, hopefully you've already spotted that I've changed the numbers down here. Instead of doing 360 degrees of the zodiac, I've just done 90s. That means this is an easy way. It's still, the planets themselves are still where they're supposed to be, but by doing this in a 90-degree thing, I've taken, for example, oh gosh, sorry. Planets moving between 0 degrees Aries through to 0 degrees Cancer, and then this would start Cancer again, going through to Libra, Libra through to Capricorn, Capricorn, and back to Aries. So when any two lines cross on this, it means those two planets are either conjunct, square to one another, or opposing one another. So in other words, these are big things. These are really important crossing points. And I singled out for you these ones in the middle here. This is 2028 and into 2029, because we will have, there's Pluto, which will be moving through Aquarius. It tells you at the side what sign it is. There's Chiron, which will have crossed from Aries. It's gone into Taurus. So in other words, Pluto is going to be at right angles to Chiron. And simultaneously, Saturn, which is also going to be in Taurus, is going to be conjunct. So we're going to have a Saturn-Chiron conjunction at the same time as we have Saturn and Chiron square Pluto. And that's going on for quite a little while. We've got some experience of this. Sadly, we know that whenever Chiron has gone through Taurus in the past, there has been a sense of lack and poor food. You can actually find famines that are related to Chiron going through Taurus. So we have to look at 2028 and 2029 as possibly being years when there is hunger or that there is some food limitation. Sorry, I don't want to be doom-laden about this, but supposing I'm correct, supposing that solar cycle is actually coming down, right? And supposing we're going into solar minimum about 2029, if the sun is not behaving properly, that could be one reason we don't get sufficient crops, or it could be because the world really has gone to hell in a handcart and we've got a world war, right? But whichever way you look at it, right? I think we have to be preemptive about this, and we have to think that food could be scarce, right? Commodity prices, therefore, are likely to rise. Right? Again, I'm not doing it today, but if I do this, if I superimpose GAN cycles with crop growing, wheat, corn, whatever, yes, it is entirely possible that we will have floods in the Mississippi, which could then alter, makes a lack, and then prices go up. I'm seeing something in the chat, so let me have a drink of water and read that one. Yeah, Thomas, yes, it is the 90-degree dial, and yes, absolutely. Yes, this is, I've just used it as a 90-degree graphic ephemeris, but yes, absolutely, that's what it is. Sorry, quick glug of water. So 2028, which I think is the year that we all of us need to be prepared for. This is where you want to store up your store cupboard and have a bit more in the bank, or some supplies that you can rely on, right? I chose this wintry picture because I think that's maybe the best way to look at it, as a year of winter. It starts off with a solar eclipse in January of 2028, which has the sun, moon, and Pluto all at 6 degrees of Aquarius, which for my money is far too close to 7 degrees, and the chart for mankind. And that looks to me like that's ugly. That suggests difficulties, and Pluto at its worst. Chiron will be on the halfway point, squaring the nodes. And again, that if Chiron at its worst in Taurus says something about lack, right, and problems possibly with land, right, land which may have been corrupted for unknown reasons. If I go further on into the year, by the 8th of June, Saturn and Chiron will be conjoining at 6 degrees of Taurus. Again, it is 6 degrees and 51 minutes, which is just too close to that 7 degree that I had picked up. So this looks to me as though this is a problem time, and the Saturn Chiron will be squaring Pluto. Now, any of you who've been through, if you've gone through a transit where Saturn has affected your Pluto, or Pluto has affected your Saturn, you'll know that one of the big themes of that is that there's this need to minimalize. You want to discard things. You want to strip back to basics. So this could be a whole thing about, we can live with less, right? And it may be that it's just that we may have to live with less, though, because there may be less available. I really hope that Saturn Chiron is not going to be a manifestation of some other disease that affects crops. It's possible, though. So again, we're going to have to think carefully about what we grow and how we grow it. I thought I wanted to put a little bit of hope into this, because I think there is hope. On the 24th of August, which is only a few weeks later, Jupiter enters Libra, and when it crosses the world axis. And I hold out hope that at some point, supposing there is a war, supposing we do experience something really horrible, ugly, maybe Jupiter's entry into Libra is going to bring people to the table and say, look, this is nonsense. We have to resolve this. So maybe, we can look at this enthusiastically and with some warmth. Right? And maybe Jupiter in Libra is also going to benefit the firms and people who look after, say, mergers and acquisitions. That's something that could be thought of. So that now I got to go back, right? Sorry, I'm fast forwarding. I took out a chart for this one. We've all of us been talking about the inauguration chart that we just had at the beginning of this year, right? And it was a heck of a chart. Whoever had got in, whoever had taken on the US presidency was faced with an extraordinary chart with the Grand Cross that included the Moon, Mercury, Chiron, and Mars. It was a heck of a chart, right? And it says everything about being torn apart and, the tariffs and what have you. But it's interesting then to look to see what does the next inauguration chart look like, right? Well, is it going to be any better? Now, I can't be sure of the time, of course. I know it will be on the 20th of January, and I know it'll start at about 12 o'clock, and the actual swearing in will be about 12:20-ish. So forgive me with the ascendant and the midheaven, that's probably wrong, right? But we can see a few bits of this. We've got a Moon-Neptune conjunction, but the moon is at 8 degrees of Aries, which is another key financial degree and tends to be to do with loss. So it's looking a bit miserable there. But there is also a kite shape in here. So I think this is going to fly some new ideas, right? I don't think the trade war is going to be over. And I certainly think the USA is going to be absolutely in the grip of something. The lunar node, the south node, is on its solar position. Right? this is, of course, assuming that the inauguration goes ahead, but the rule books might have been changed by then. Who knows? What we do know is that Jupiter and Sedna will be in contraparallel to one another, and Venus and Uranus in contraparallel. So I don't think it's going to be an easy election, that one. And whenever there's dis-ease with things like that, and there's an unknown, and of course there's a retrograde Mercury, when markets don't know which way things are going, right, they tend to go to the downside rather than an up. So again, this is telling me, right, I don't like the look of 26, right, not sure about 27. 2028 definitely looks tricky. 2029, not quite sure where the recovery point yet. Recovery is going to come later. So as I start to move towards your personal charts, I've got to think about safety first. That's because these next few years do look tricky. As I said, I don't think you can avoid the cryptos, right? I think you need to have a little bit in them, right? It's the birth of Bitcoin, right? And this is Wiki's definition of what Bitcoin is. It is that it operates independently of a central bank. Right? Now, Bitcoin is the big kid on the block because it was first, right? And it goes back to 2009. It was followed then by Ethereum and Ripple and all the others. But Ethereum's 2015. It's got a very different different planetary picture. I'm doing a lecture about all of I'm doing my crypto event tomorrow, and when I'm going to cover this more in depth and the ones that are likely to develop. Bitcoin, though, cannot, the genie is out of the bottle. Bitcoin is going to be with us, right? It's very expensive, and I doubt that expense is going to change very much, right? But I don't think you can ignore the cryptos that are around. I thought you would like to see this chart, which is the heliocentric one for the 3rd of January 2009, when Bitcoin was supposed to have been born. If it is, it's an extraordinary date because Mars and Pluto were both exactly on the helio world axis. I mean, an extraordinary chart. But there you've also got Saturn opposing Uranus. I mean, these are extraordinary conditions. Bitcoin is going to be with us, right? And I think it probably will increase hugely in value because it'll be shortage, right? That everything is down to supply and demand, and people will decide it's the thing to have. Right? I'm expecting there to be a surge of interest in it in June of 2032, as Jupiter at the very end of Capricorn by then opposes the Mercury of this chart. Again, it's a whole other topic, that one. But if you've got Bitcoin, I would hold on to it, even though I know that it's going to have some serious downs between now and then. So for you, for preparing for 2026, these are the things you know are going to happen. Jupiter's in Cancer, right? It's now too late, really, to invest in Jupiter in Cancer. Had you done, what would you have invested in? Well, as my colleague Grace Morris, I don't know if you can. Grace is actually staying in your area now, isn't she? I think she's living in Dallas. She would be an amazing, if you could get Grace to speak, she's just phenomenal, right? Absolutely phenomenal. She's an absolute class act, but she's done all this incredible work. Showing that the sectors that advance are the ones related to Jupiter, Jupiter. So Jupiter in Cancer is home improvements, for example. Right? So you would have invested in things like, I don't know, bed and baths, stuff like that. Too late to do that now. We've got to start to be thinking about Jupiter going into Leo. How can you invest in Saturn, Neptune? Well, invest in your health, just in case that's going to be the problem, right? But also invest in your ideas. Think cathedral, think what do you want your legacy to be? What plans have you got? The February eclipse, and I thought the astrologers would love this, right? The February eclipse is actually on the astrologer's degree. I don't know if you know this, but there was a study done, I think in the 1980s, that showed that at the time, and it's a study that needs to be done again, of course, is that 27, 28 degrees of Aquarius showed up very prominently in the chart of astrologers. So I'm looking at it, and I'm fascinated, with the cycles of this, and I'm thinking we're going to see a surge of interest in astrology next year. It'd be really good, right? Uranus is going to go into Gemini, so some people will want to invest in Uranus in Gemini. We'll talk about that. Chiron is doing a short trip into Taurus next summer, which I would like you to view as being the rehearsal. And probably that's the time, if you want to realize cash, right, that's the time to clear out the stuff that you no longer love, right? Get rid of it. And maybe, do your eBay thing. At the same time, Jupiter moves into Leo. Right? One of the first things Jupiter does, of course, once it's gone into Leo, is it opposes Pluto. Right? So there is a little bit of the gambler's aspect in play in July, and possibly we'll have a little bit of a minor crash that goes with that. And then, of course, the August eclipse. So I thought you might like playing with this. I'm looking at the time. Do you want to play with this now, or shall I keep going and then we play? What would you like? You're a very quiet audience. Is that because I talk too much?
Plus, we're muted.
Oh, plus you're muted. All right.
Yeah.
Well,
It's very interesting. It's very interesting. I'd say keep on going if everybody else is good.
I think
Are you
so
okay?
too.
I vote for a bio break.
A bio break. Okay, well that would be great if I could have a glass of water. That'd be lovely. Let's just have a 5 right.
5-minute break. Sounds good.
That'll give you time to chat to put some questions in if you like.
On your left.
Well, it's been sitting all again.
Nice to see you. Are you leaving?
No.
Bio break.
Oh.
And sign in when you come back with your email address.
Okay.
Thank you.
Haven't seen you in forever. I think it's ever been.
Maria, I saw you take the little dog.
Yes, I'm dog sitting for a neighbor's blind dog, and normally she's a little livelier. I don't know. He must have had her at a late night party or something, because she's just been sleeping here. She ate good, but outside she just sat on the lawn.
Oh, okay.
I mean, she needs help because she's blind, but she usually kind of can tell where the sidewalk versus the grass and all that. But so anyways, and then I have to take little videos and pictures and send them to the lady who owns the pet sitting company that I know, and then she forwards them on. So
How are we doing, Marie? Is this what people expected or not?
Oh, I think so, definitely. Yeah, we got a nice little crowd here. Maybe later on we can go around in the people we've not seen before, kind of introduce yourself, the guests. That I cut in and out a couple times here. What you put there for Leo, entertainment, sports, gambling, or whatever. Las Vegas is struggling here. That spear dome thingy, whatever it's called, I can't remember. It's closed. They said the shows that they did there, or show, whatever it is, has got a pretty tight audience. You got to be in Las Vegas, but it takes so many engineers to do it. They can't take it on the road and go anyplace else because it's specific to that building, and it's very high cost to put any of that on. And something just happened with the Steve Wynn casino. Did he file for bankruptcy or something? Somebody see that recently?
I didn't.
For him being in the news.
No, but I was at the Spear a couple months ago in Vegas.
I believe it's closed. It's
Wow.
been on the I see a lot of YouTube news basically, but yes, Steve Wynn, the Wynn Casino, WINN, I think.
Yeah, I've stayed there before. It's really
Problems.
nice.
Yeah.
They had a
And
really
then
nice buffet.
and then the Spear is it's closed. I don't know if they meant the entire time or part of the time, but I think it's like closed.
Mm,
They said it was just phenomenal cost to run it, but a lot of people are watching their money, so they're not doing the Vegas
and
thing.
then,
There's too much uncertainty. Wonder
yeah,
why.
that's
Sorry, I'm just looking at the chat. I must make sure that I've covered everything people want. Right, I'll go and get another drink. Aha.
Good.
Nice to meet you. Hope to see you.
Well, she's got other things to do there for all of that. So, after all this is over, I don't have it.
I want to retire too, Julie. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. I don't think I'm going to retire to the day they put me in the ground.
It's about.
I'm 65 in June.
We're waiting on when she pull up that inauguration chart for 2025. And Pluto and the sun can jump on the inauguration. And then if you look at Trump's chart, Pluto is entering in 6th house, which is his job, right? So it's like Pluto is, inflamed. The employee of Jason. And it shows the inauguration chart. And it shows in his trend. I haven't seen anybody from. I don't think. Yeah, but well, right, you know. When I see that inauguration chart, I go, yes.
Oh, I see you all coming back.
That's a good. Okay, is Thomas back too?
Okay. If Thomas is back, then I'll go.
Thank you very much. Yes, I'm back.
Right, well,
Camera.
right, we're on the last stretch now, and I've picked up, wait a minute, there's another one here, right? Okay. Right. Okay. So I'm just going to pick up on this theme because you were talking about Las Vegas. And of course that's a reality. But another reality is that when the world goes to hell in a handcart, very often theaters and places do very well, right? Because people look for some kind of salve, right? So I think actually it is too late to get into Leo. I prefer, my own risk management system is that I'm looking at Jupiter and Virgo companies and Jupiter and Libra because I want to play way ahead of the game. Right? So you have to do your own research on this. But do you know Grace Morris's Astroeconomics newsletter?
Yes.
Yep. Because Grace is so good at identifying, the sectors that are going to do well. But we are ahead of the curve. We know that Jupiter won't skip a sign. So after Leo, it will go into Virgo. So you could start now looking at companies that are doing the Virgo things, the data management and compliance, the precision engineering and things, and look for a time when their prices seem to be very low, and then have a reasonable amount of confidence that they will do well, even bucking the trend for a time which looks as though it's going to be quite tough. Libra, of course, is the mergers and acquisitions, and it's the fashions. And Scorpio, again, this is a fabulous one because we now know that there are new industries opening up. Digital death, it won't be long before we're willing to part with money to have our Facebook accounts scrambled or got rid of, right? We're going to be thinking differently, right? What I'm trying to say here is that new sectors are going to emerge, and the advantage with astrology is that we can think outside the box. We can think differently. Now, one of the things that you put in the questions there, and I'm going to apologize to start with, to say your 401ks and the Roth thing, that's an alien system to me, because here in the UK we operate completely differently. So I don't feel qualified to speak about that. What I do think is that one or two of you said, well, I was planning on retiring at 65, and that looks as though that's out of the window, right? Well, sadly, I think it is out of the window, right? But we grew up with this idea that, we would work and then at 65 we would retire. That was not the case in earlier centuries. People went on and did things. I think as your astrologers, right, I also think that you will have a means of doing some earning through astrology. I'm confident about that because that's also, to me, that's a growing market, right? I think we have to be prepared for some really tricky years, but I also think we can think about how the world is moving. You talk to your grandchildren about the companies and things, the interests that they have. You might not be interested in Roblox, but you can bet that you know somebody who is, and get some idea about what is going to advance. Sorry, there's another question in there. Let me get that. Right, okay. So, let's just go on then. So your celestial wealth, I saved this slide from another talk that I did, but because I like the picture actually, right? These two young ladies, right, are obviously still having fun, even though, the weather looks absolutely frightful. And I think we have to do the same. I think we have to take a positive approach. I think if you just think negatively, you attract negative, right? So let's just deal with where we think there might be upsets and say this is where they are. Right? It seems that interest rates, right, are very often linked to when the slower moving planets are aspecting the node. And if that's the case, we may have an interest rate upset in June of 2026, which will be just prior to Jupiter going into Leo. Now, my guess is this: governments won't be able to pay their way. Right? So they're going to put the squeeze on, trying to get some more money out of us. Right? It won't work, right? But I think there'll be some kind of panic action in June of next year. They might then have to reduce all that when we get to November of 26 or even February of 27, when Jupiter is 180 degrees from the node, and they feel that they've got to give something in order to virtually bribe us back into play. 2026, though, is very definitely a year of smoke and fire. Right? Jupiter is going to go into Leo, fire sign. Neptune is going to go into Aries, fire sign. Right? And we know that whenever we have a top-heavy stuff in fire signs, right, we usually have inflation. Now, offsetting against that is that we've got Saturn going into Aries, and hopefully that will act as some kind of regulator. But I would think that the big theme next year is going to be, how can inflation be stopped? I think it's already got some value here already. Right? I think we're experiencing it, right? We're going into the shadow of it, ready for it coming out. So I think we also have to think about rising prices. That figures when we go back to the inauguration chart from 20th of January of this year, which had, as I was telling you earlier, that incredible grand cross, right? There's the moon at 18 of Libra, Mercury 18 Capricorn, Chiron 19 Aries, Mars 24 Cancer. Now you should immediately be thinking, hold on a minute, that 24 Cancer, that's ringing a bell. Of course it's ringing a bell because Jupiter's there and it's stationed, 24, 25, right? So the whole tariff thing is now back on the menu, and we should expect to hear a lot more about that in the next couple of weeks, right? Now they may well say, oh, well, sorry, we made a mistake about that. We're not going to do it because remember, Mercury is also retrograde, so we're in for a little bit of a messy time. But the problem is not over because until Saturn gets past the Chiron position, which is in 2027, right, we're dealing with very difficult price structures. And you can see the tension again over here, right, when you start to look at the declinations. You've got Mercury in contraparallel with Mars. It's arguing against itself. Whoever had taken the job, whoever got the job last year, this was always this tension in the sky, which obviously affected every part of the world. It's not just peculiar to the United States, but we have growing commercial tension everywhere. And I don't think it's going to be resolved until that little triangle I was talking about has absolutely dissipated. And that's not going to happen really for the next few years. So we have to face that truth. Saturn and Neptune, yes, they could bring one torrential downpour, right? But the best way to deal with that is to make sure that you've got an umbrella. So you need to think about where's safe, right? The safe havens have traditionally been in gold and in silver, right? Now, as I said, I took out the big slides on that because I didn't want to get into the trading thing of those. But do I think the price of gold is going to go up in 2026, 27? Yes, I do, right? Do I think that silver is going to do very well? Yes. In fact, in percentage terms, I'm expecting silver to do better than gold, mainly because silver has more use. So I think there will be a demand for silver in the way you can actually live without gold. But I'm not sure that we can live without silver. It's used in medical instruments and many other sources. So I'm thinking that having a little bit of those in your portfolio wouldn't be a bad idea. If you could get uranium, that would be an even better idea. So now I need to show you how to do your personal financial planning. Now, Thomas has said about using the 90-degree. Thomas, did you mean the 90-degree dial?
Yes, I spelled it wrong.
Oh, no, I wasn't picking on the spelling, but some people prefer it in the circle form. I just like it as this graphic ephemeris. It's just a personal choice, this. But this is looking at January, February, and March, just the first quarter of next year. And this is where I think we can all of us take some action. So this is a 90-degree sheet, this. So there's Mars is in Capricorn at the beginning of the year. And the full moon, of course, will be the sun in Capricorn and the moon in Cancer. And it will be very close. So that looks as though, stock market wise, that looks, what's it going to be? Is it more likely to be up or down? And it's quite likely to want to push itself up. Capricorn likes to get to the top of the market. So that might be a little bit of a lift there. But Mars does not stay in Capricorn. It moves. And here, by the end of the month, Mars has gone into Aquarius. And then before the end of the month, it crosses with Pluto. So there's a Mars-Pluto conjunction in Aquarius. Read the newspapers, read the stories of businesses. I personally, I mean, I shouldn't say this because astrology magazines are all fascinating, but actually I prefer just as much to get things like the New Scientist. I want to see what the new ideas are that are coming up, right? Because I want to invest in those. So I will be looking for Aquarian ideas. This is where we've got Saturn and Neptune getting closer and closer together until there they are. There's their conjunction in February, which is just a few days after the solar eclipse, which is square Uranus. Now, all of that, these factors together say this is instability. This is stock market instability. Plus, we get Mars in Pisces at the same time as a lunar eclipse. Now, does Mars like being in Pisces? No, it gets all wishy-washy, right? So the first quarter of the year doesn't look exactly perfect. It looks as though it's really kind of quite tricky. If you know that, if you've invested and you're invested for the long term, just ignore the noise, right? Because what goes down usually comes up again after a few years. If, however, you're trading more frequently, right, and you're interested in trading, right, then start looking for opportunities. Start looking for the Mars in Aquarius ones. Saturn and Neptune are going to meet. Right? They meet in February of 2026. They will come to their first square at 19 degrees of Cancer in 2033. Right? For me, that looks as though that first quarter is not going to see stock markets going to super highs. Right? They're already very high, right? But I think a massive correction is going to come. Right? I think the real growth thing will happen after 2033 and going into the, more actually between 2042 and through to 2052. Whatever you're planning to invest in, right, I think you have to think in terms of 10, 15-year long investments and not short ones. The second quarter of the year, right, has, sorry, what have I done here? Oh, yeah, sorry, this is still the first quarter of the year, but looking at it on the declination line, right, that's affirming how complicated this quarter could be and how lumpy it could be, because we have the full moon in February, which is conjunct Uranus. So that's instability in there, instability. Plus Mars parallel the node at the same time as we've got Saturn and Neptune now meeting by declination. So in short, the first quarter of 2026 looks to me as though it's full of financial banana skins, right? And is kind of not a healthy place either financially or even physically. As I said, if you're playing for the long term, don't even think about it. But if you're playing for shorter than that, you've got to start looking for where there are opportunities to buy in whilst things are low. If I go back to the 10th of July of this year, right, that's when that's when I became really fixated about that little triangle I was pointing out to you. Right? And it's in process. It actually goes on beyond 2028, but by that time Neptune has moved on. It gets to about 4, right? So the little triangle itself moves just a little bit, right? But essentially, sorry, I've lost it. God. Essentially, once a month, the moon is opposing that. Look to see what happens on those dates. Now, you might be interested to know that in August of 2025, Mars opposed the Saturn-Neptune, which in fact at that time had moved back into, both of them were in Pisces. Mars opposed from a tail end of Virgo. And that was when Mr. Trump and Mr. Putin met in Anchorage. Do you remember they were trying to resolve everything? And in a sense, they were flying a kite. It didn't work. That kite didn't work. But kites quite often don't work the first few times. Eventually, of course, they will. But it's quite interesting to look back to see what you yourself were doing then. I think it was about the 9th of August, that one. Chiron, I've told you I'm concerned about, because these are the times when Chiron has been in Taurus before, in March 1927 through to June 1933, and then 1976 to 1983, right? And this is where there are tests in stability, security, self-worth, material possessions. It's not a time when people are generally very confident. Inside the DNA, and particularly for those who perhaps have Irish descent, that goes back to the Great Depression of the Irish potato famine. And that's still, that's still the idea of poverty and having to claw and fight for what's right. That's still very much in that DNA. You also have the Homodor in Ukraine, right? Again, it's inside the DNA of these people. So it's I think Chiron going through Taurus is not going to be an easy experience. This is where it's. This is the second quarter, right? But again, I'm taking this one from the declination point of view, and the traps are here, right, in the middle of April, which, as it happens, will also be the anniversary of. Do you remember when everything fell off a cliff in April, when those tariffs were announced? Middle of April of this year, which was a tricky one because Chiron was involved with that full moon, right? So you've got echoes of that then. Right? Looked at on the normal system, looking for squares and oppositions and what have you. Here we've got Uranus, which has backed up into Taurus just recently, right? Just the last few days. It crosses properly into Gemini by the end of April. So I think we're in a real transition phase now. We really, really are. We're seeing there will be tests for cryptos, particularly with Uranus going through Taurus, the ups and downs from now through until the end of April will be considerable. Then once Uranus gets into Gemini, then it's a different ball game entirely. We'll be looking at different features. You can also highlight these times here. This looks interesting. This is the lunar node crossing the Uranus thing, which I think is going to be an interest rate issue. Do you remember? I picked that up from June. You might want to now start thinking, though, if you want to invest in Gemini, right, with Uranus going into there, these are the lists, and you can play with this yourself. What do you think Gemini is, right? Do you think lots of people are going to have multiple children? Should we be investing in twin prams? Should we be investing in fancy bicycles, tandems, whatever? It's also media, the news, any kind of distribution, right? Education, right? And education, of course, is changing so much now because we now got the idea of super teachers, right? Teaching on the internet. So you don't have to have the local bad teacher anymore. You can actually watch somebody who's really, really good teaching you physics. Railroads, they're likely to come into being again. Computing, definitely. The advances there will be considerable, and anything that's high tech. If you are investing for Jupiter, right, I've added to the list here jewelry. I know the question is going to be, do you think the price of gold will go up when Jupiter is in Leo? Right? Actually, that's not the way that when I did the analysis, which again, sorry, I'm not showing you, but actually gold does better during the course of the year. Jupiter's winning time is whilst the sun is in Capricorn. Right? The Leo thing does not work. Vacations, because people are going to want a break from the dire stuff. Right? You're also, I think, going to see far more flamboyant designs, right? But these are flash in the pan possible profits. Right? The third quarter of the year, this is the declination one again. We've in the first few weeks of July, we've got Mars, Jupiter, and Uranus all in this is a car crash time at the beginning of July. Now, I want to think differently, but if that is some kind of military movement, which it could be, right, that will make things like defense stocks, they will become more expensive. So if you really think that that's what's going to happen, then maybe you'll want to buy into those earlier. Right? By September, the new moon is with Saturn, which is a bit of a misery guts picture. So that looks like that's a bit of a low market-wise. But the third quarter has the most difficult aspect of all in it because it has Jupiter at 180 degrees away from Pluto, right? Which is the gambler's curse. Right? And that happens within a few weeks. You've got Jupiter crossing Pluto here, right? Followed not too long later by a full moon that aligns with Jupiter. And meanwhile, you've got the node moving into Aquarius. This bit here, I think we'll see extraordinary stock market volatility. Right? I do a monthly class on this. And so then I'll be looking at these things more closely. But just this, what you're seeing is my notes ready for the big thing of 2026. Chiron returns to Aries, having gone through this tricky lunar eclipse in August. So again, none of this looks like it's happy time in the markets. Right? Slight boost, though, perhaps towards the tail end of September, right? Maybe. So I went back then to look at the 19th of October of next year. This, I can't remember why I picked this one up to start with. I was looking to see, because people tend to think, are there going to be stock market crashes quite often happen in the October right of a year? So I was looking for a difficult time. And I wasn't really happy about this 19th of October, but it's a Sunday. So maybe this is just going to be a day of storms, which leaves markets a bit low the following day on the Monday. More importantly, is November, when you've got a crossing of the Mars with Jupiter and the node in the middle of November. That again, it could be a military action, right? But again, looks like you'd need to be on financial alert. This is the declination one, right? Which is this is around that 19th of October, just as the sun is about to go into Scorpio. So that looks like it's a low. I'm pointing out lows because they tend to be good shopping times. Right? Yeah, you very often can find a good bargain then. Let me just pick up this. Oh, thank you. Did I put the wrong chart in? I modeled them up. Ah, sorry. Sorry. And we've just had that. I'll come back to that. Thank you. Right, I'm just near the end now. I thought you might be interested in the years which, when somebody comes to me and I'm doing a reading for someone, there are certain years that stand out for me as being potentially financially critical. I use all sorts of techniques, but this is running in my mind all the time. At 24, people very often got their first paycheck, right? It's the first return in adulthood, and there may be a discussion then about, what should I invest in, right? The Saturn return, right? That very often brings up a financial issue. 36, you've got the nodal return and the Jupiter third return. Age 40, key one. It's not just because you might have outer planet, Uranus oppositions and that kind of thing. But from the solar arc point of view, the sun will have traveled 2/9 of a circle. Very often people take stock then and want to take a different financial direction. 48 is usually a year of expansion. Age 52 and 53, very, very common for people to start another revenue stream then. It comes on the back of the Chiron return. The solar arc is now 1/7 of a circle apart. Then you've got the Saturn second return, and sometimes there's a financial crisis there. Jupiter, at age 60, the fifth return. But the one I like best, and I've just been through this, and can I recommend it, is the one age 72, the sixth Jupiter return, when it is really not unusual for people to embark on a fresh financial adventure. And with the experience of all those other things, right, very often make good with it. So I wanted to leave you with some thoughts. For you, I think you should think about which planets are activated by that mini triangle in your natal chart, and how can you best make use of that. In your natal chart, you should also look at your progressed and the converse. That's just as important. Always check your solar return for activity in the 2nd, the 5th, the 8th, and the 11th houses. These are the financial houses. Where is your safety net? Now, I haven't discussed that really with you, because I've been showing you where I thought there might be crisis points. But you have to think, where is your safety net? As I said, a little bit of gold, bit of crypto, bit of property, bit of equity, bit of cash, you know, and how would you cope if there were going to be difficulties over a 6-month period? That's what you need to think about. And within the safety net, never underestimate the importance of community and neighbors. But also, where's the fun, right? Nobody should just be putting that, you know, don't do the Midas thing where you're storing up all the money and you're not actually enjoying living, right? Because that's, you need the balance. And your legacy, right? Which is just as important. Right? And on that, I want to show you something, right? I'm just going to go to this for a minute. Yes, Jupiter return. Yes, Thomas, it's good. It's a good one, right? So I want to take you somewhere else before I finish, right? I'm going to take you to this in a minute. If you want to get this PDF directly from me, you just need to ask this, use this email, please, juliecityscopes@gmail.com. I've put a few links in here. There's the NCGR's Geocosmic one is there. But if you have never been to it, you need to go and have a look at the Alexandria iBase. And this, I am super proud of being involved with this. Because this is where we are looking after all the books that might end up on dumpsters if it's the case that maybe your family aren't particularly interested in astrology, and when you leave this mortal coil, maybe they won't be interested in your books. But we're working to protect and make sure nothing gets really lost, right? It's a wonderful collection this year. Have a look in the catalogue. I'm going to do one for you. Right. You can use this to, suppose I decide that actually I would like to know what else is there about financial astrology. I can look in that and up will come a whole list of books. Now, you can't buy the books or read the books directly from here, but it'll at least help you. It'll tell you where they are, right? If you need to go and find them, right? Up here, it can tell you we've got 1,400 books now listed on the internet. We have some